How long can you live without water? About 3 days. How long can you live without shelter?
All your
A
life.
long time. How long can you live without food? At least 40 days and 40 nights. So how is important is water? Do you know how much water you are personally? 70 what?
25.
Yeah, that's right. You're 75% water. And when we talk about water, we're talking about the importance of it. But before we get into water, I want to ask y'all a question. Did you have enough on shelter? Are you okay with everything we covered last? Because if not, we'll try to clear up a few things or give you a little more information. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, so water. Water is a very, very important part of a homestead. In fact, it's a very important point of our lives, period. And as we look at this, we need to get our heads kind of wrapped around of thinking what we've been talking about is having your independence. If the grid system falls apart, which we don't know if it's going to or when it's going to, I believe it's going to happen eventually to a lesser or greater degree. But for those that want to live on the land and they want that freedom of independence, you've got to figure out somehow to have water and to have enough water to be able to do what you need at your homestead life. Now, there's all kinds of different ways to look at water. One of the things that you need to take into consideration as you're looking at land, where you live and what's around you. You don't want a hog farm next to your farm. You don't want a dump within 10 to 15 miles of your farm. And you need to make sure when you buy a piece of land what's around you within that boundary. Some of these dumps have some pretty toxic chemicals that gets into the water system. And you don't want to be in the watershed of this kind of contamination. You can't cook and drink with water that's contaminated with toxins or poisons that can kill you. There was a homestead, and it was a gorgeous piece of land. When you looked at it, it had everything. It had the timber, it had the grow land, it had a big nice spring on it, and all these things. But they had no idea that the land was a toxic dump for a chemical company. They weren't told that. They tried to grow food and it all died. They tried to raise livestock and the livestock was dying. They wouldn't have their water tested and it was so toxic it was burning the ground. Yeah. And when you start talking about water, we've got to be very conscious of what we're doing when we go to get good water. In fact, it's getting harder and harder to get good water and safe water because of what's happening in the world we're living in. The further you can get away from a major city, the better. And then you've got to figure out what's all around you. One of the problems we're having in this water discussion is what's happening way north of this country, almost to the Canadian border, up there by the big Great Lakes. Our watershed all the way down here comes from up there. Y'all knew that, right? The problem is what is between there and here? Thousands and thousands of acres of chemical dump farming. And those chemicals that are being dumped on the soil season after season after season is washing into our water system. We're going to talk a little bit about filtering systems to filter out the best you can the water you have. Water is very, very important. The other thing that we're finding to be a struggle on just trying to live and trying to survive. And I learned this years ago. I was living amongst an Amish community. We bought a farm, and it just happened to have a lot of Amish, old order Amish people that lived all around where we were at. And they were all totally off grid. That's the way those folks, the more old order Amish live. And so everything they did had to be dependent on the old-fashioned ways. And so they developed either wells, and they had ways of getting, like with windmills and all those things. Yet they would catch the rain catchment, as we talked about that house up there, and having the proper type of gutter systems on it that are large enough gutter system to catch water off of a metal roof. That metal roof is very important in being able to shed the water off without all the trash from shingles. Those shingles, I know people that had shingle roofs and they put in a water system, a catchment system, and after the year's period of time, they looked down in their tank and their tank was full of shingles. All the gravel that's on those shingles. And you know what's on those shingles? Heavy duty toxins, poison. And so their water became very toxic. Even filters weren't going to filter out that water, so they had to tear that system off and put a metal roof on. You don't want to have to do that. But one of the problems we're having, and it's all across the country, is that we have rain that is picked up from toxic lands and cities, and it's transported across the country. And when it rains, we have what's called these acid rain fallout. These acid rain fallout is caused because of the lifestyles that we all love to have. And y'all do know that, right? So we can't be shame on Big Brother. We need to be shame me. Because we're the ones that really have demanded that out of the system. So, again, let's get to thinking a little bit differently, maybe a little radical. All right? So, when we think about water, we need to think about our location. When you find a piece of land, I know this gets kind of complicated, and I don't mean to get it to where it's almost overwhelming to y'all, but I can't help it. When you look for a piece of land, you look for a piece of land that's out of the wind flow of major cities. Which way is your wind and your rain coming from? Consistently. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because if you live in line of a major city where the rain is going to come right straight through, what are you going to get from that rain? Acid rain.
Wow.
You're going to get toxic, poisonous rain, and no matter how much you might catch, it's useless. It's getting harder and harder, my friends, to find land that's out of the path of this situation. Do the best you can, and don't weird out about it. I'm just presenting you the things that are the things you have to think about, so that when you're looking for a piece of land and you want out, you've got to think about what tomorrow's going to hold on that piece of land. When you think about getting a piece of land, you want to make sure you're far enough out. I mean, these folks right here, your family, When they moved out here, there was nothing here. It was real country. Look at it now. Go out there and then ask yourself the question, how far are they from Atlanta? Not that far, is it? So when you think about these things, you make sure that you get out far enough that you don't have the city moving out into you becoming the village. It's happening all over the country, my friends. Yeah. So when I buy and when I go to look for land, what I look for is how far it is away from the city. What's the direction of the rainfall? Where is it coming from? Where is the general rule of the wind storms coming from? So that when I catch water or whatever I do, I know that my water is going to be at least as safe as it possibly. It's going to be impossible to get really good pure water anyway, because we all love our automobiles. We are part responsible because we've become so used to getting in our buggies and driving 500 miles in a day. You know? And what that's doing with millions of us, it's puking a lot of stuff into the air. That stuff becomes caught by rain, and it comes wherever it may land. So, we've got to learn to help cut our carbon, don't we? Our carbon print. Now, when we look at this subject of water, it's one of the most important things that you have on your farm or on your land or on your homestead, which I call farmstead. And now, without going too far into that to get you really depressed, let's look at the situation let's look at how to catch, how to use what water you do have. When you look at a piece of land, you want to look, first of all, or you may even talk to the neighbors, you may even talk to the county agency. You may want to go and look and ask them, what is the water quality like here in this county, in this area that I'm moving to? Because there are counties that we know of, and we've had good friends that have moved into these counties, and they punched a well and the water came out orange. Heavy rust. And on top of that, because they didn't look, they didn't realize that the natural gas companies had gone in there and punched all over the cotton picking country these gas wells and ruined the water table. And all this trash from underground that they broke loose went right into the water table. So when you punched a well to get water, guess what? That water was useless. So you need to ask these questions when you're looking for a piece of land, or what kind of water source you're going to be using. What is our water like? Is it heavy iron? Is it heavy alkaline? What is it? Don't just assume because you're going to have a well or a spring or catching rain that it's going to be good water. You cannot assume that. You've got to ask questions.
What if it is heavy iron in your area? Because I know our area in Kern County is heavy in the iron.
Well, if you have heavy iron water, you can deal with it because your plant life will deal with it. The big problem is when we get into our next section, growing food, I'm going to really try to cut this water thing down because growing food's really very important to get some things wrapped around our heads. When you go to irrigating products, it depends on, or the foodstuffs you're going to grow, you got to learn how to have the most efficient way to irrigate your food. Sprinkler irrigation works, but it will create 50 to 70% more work for you. We'll see when we get in there. But the problem is if you go to the proper type of irrigation, that heavy iron tends to plug up your irrigation system. So if you're okay with that, and you're okay with using sprinkler systems, then the heavy iron's okay. Because it's not going to hurt plant life, and it's not that heavy that it's going to hurt your soil. I mean, in reality. Where the problem is you. When you're cooking with it, when you're drinking it, because if we're 75% water, that means most of us in this room are dehydrated, because I haven't seen any of you drinking water. Oh, good for you. Oh, all right. I like to see those water jugs going up. So, the problem with heavy iron or heavy metal, and that's not rock and roll, by the way, that's just heavy minerals. You get these heavy minerals, our body was not made to handle those heavy minerals over a period of time. And so you've got to figure out how to filter that water to get those heavy minerals out of there. And one of the greatest filters we know of is called the Berkey system. The Berkey water filter system is amazing. You can take septic water and put it in that filtering system and it comes out pure. That's how amazing this filter is. And it's not that expensive. Look it up. Berkey. It comes by different sizes. And there are actually companies, and I think Berkey does it, they have a whole house system, or they have just the kind that will fit up on your counter, and you pour like 2 or 3 gallons, or I think even bigger, into the top tray, and it's all stainless steel, and it drips down through a carbon charcoal filter system. And it cleans your water like something else.
We have that problem in our house for quite a while. Then we bought a filter. We used to tall filters too, about 4 feet tall. We paid more than $2,000. But
It works.
it worked.
Oh yeah.
The water was orange. The smell was bad.
Yeah.
Now it comes clear. You don't smell nothing.
Yeah.
And thank God for that day.
There is all kinds of good filtering systems, and I really do highly recommend. I'm not so concerned, I am with the chemicals like chlorinate, fluoride, and all those things. But when it comes down to minerals, you can take a shower in it, you can take a bath in it, and it's not going to hurt you. It's when you're putting it down your gullet. That's where you're going to end up with problems. So that Berkey filter is really amazing, and it really does a really nice job. And then there's these whole house systems you can get that will actually clean your water. If you're in a situation to where your water is not good, or if you're on county water because you can't afford to put a well in or whatever, and you're not ready to do a catch system or whatever, you can get that Berkey filter for all your cooking and drinking water, and it will clean everything out of that water. It comes out as close to distilled water as you can get. All right? So filtering your water, we filter our water. I filter our spring water. Not that I have to, but we just do. You know, because I don't want to take the risk of what may be coming underground from the neighbor's farm up yonder and it getting into the water table. All right? So, yeah. Now, let's talk about rain catchment. We talked a little bit about that earlier in our last session. And where did my thing go? Okay, George, what's your trip?
He's got the measure finger.
Okay, there. Water catchment, that's a spring. On the farm that we have actually 7 springs on this place. Perfect number. We weren't exactly looking for 7 springs. We just wanted a good source of spring water on the place. And that was one of the things that attracted us to that piece of land, is I asked the real estate man that was handling the land, do we have any springs on this? And he said, well, I hear there is over there in the holler. And I said, okay. I said, where's the holler at? And so off I went, Chigger City. Anybody knows what chiggers are?
Oh, yes, we do.
I can tell it to you.
Now, for anybody that lives in a city, y'all don't know what chiggers are.
Oh, man, it's horrible.
And so my wife and I headed over the hill into the holler. And oh, honey, did I wished I didn't do that. Oh, I was itching for the next month. But we found the spring, and then we found the springs. And they were all down there in a holler to where I could actually trap all 7 of them if I wanted to and take them into one channel system. And that was what was really nice. And I said, wow, it's been a long time since I've seen springs of this nice running. And when we had a drought, now we went through a drought this summer, and it got pretty dry. But those springs were just saying, hello, I'm still here. And they kept going. Now, a couple of them slowed way off to where there wasn't much coming out of them. But the 2 main springs were running about a gallon a minute in the downturn. Now, I don't know if you know how to calculate, because I'm not a good mathematician. I can play with the dirt all I want, but don't get me into math. And when you talk about a gallon a minute, how many minutes are in an hour?
60 gallons.
How many hours are in a day? 24. How many gallons in 24 hours? How much?
14.
About 1,400 gallons.
Yeah, we'd have to.
Now, I'm going to tell you something. If you use 1,400 gallons in a day, there's something wrong. On one spring, producing 1 gallon a minute.
That's good.
That's a lot of water.
Yes.
That's a lot of water. All right? Now, you stop and think of that. When you look at a piece of land, you want to think here in your mind your water source, because it may not just be you living on the land. You may have somebody that needs to have somewhere to go when things get really tough. We talked a little bit about that, and we don't want to be too selfish. So you want to make sure your water output is good enough to handle 2 to 3 families, is what I'm saying. All right? Now, with that in mind, we'll talk a little more about springs and the catchment of springs, but I want to go to dealing with the water catchment system from rainwater that comes off your roof. When you build a house, or if you already have a house, you may want to get rid of the gutters that are on your house and put bigger and better gutters on your house. All right? The gutters that will catch the best of rain, because a lot of rain will actually come off, again, it's terrible. There's so much to deal with. When your home is built correct and it's not too steep of a roof, your rain will tend to catch a lot easier into your gutters. If it's too steep, your rain is going to go, and it's going to go really fast, and a good part of it's going to jump right over the gutter. Y'all experience that? So when you build a house, I recommend no more than an 8-12 pitch on a house, down to a 6-12, and that's just about perfect. And in that, you have plenty of catchment space, but what it does is it doesn't allow the rain to run too fast off your roof into your gutters. And as you saw in the pictures up there of my house, you saw that there was the porch as well. Well, that even slows the rain down even more. When it comes down off the main roof, it hits the porch and makes a slide like on that porch into the gutters. And my 2-story house had gutters up taller and gutters down here lower, catching all of it where it wasn't losing much because it was catching. Now, when you have a metal roof, it keeps that rain as clean as possible. Now, if you live in an area to where you have lots of trees around, guess what happens into the gutters? A lot of trash can get caught real quick. And you know where that trash ends up? You're going to be swimming in the tank trying to get the trash out of your tank. So you've got to get online, and there's a lot of good information now of different types of system that catches the trash before your water goes down into the line, into your tank. It's a leaf guard, but it's more than a leaf guard. They have new systems now that actually catches a lot of trash before it ever goes down, because various different states in the union, like out in Arizona and all these dry states, they depend on what rain they get. They catch every bit of the rain. And so they have to have a good method of catching and keeping, various different trash out of the water system. And there's all kinds of really nice ones from various different screens that go right down in the gutter system itself. And very inexpensive. But that's one of the things you want to think about. Now, the other thing is that when your water catchment, your rain catchment system, you want to think about the size of your family. How many people are living in that house? Do you know what the average gallon per person is in an average home is used?
I think it's 75 gallons a day, but I don't.
It's 50 to 75 gallons per person.
It's,
That's conservative per day.
I don't use that kind of water until that.
We don't either, but I'm just saying on an average, that's pretty much a conservative number. Now, most homes use more than that. Most homes use 150 to 200 gallons a day of a family of 2, okay? Just a husband and a wife. That's pretty much the average. So what I'm saying is when you're running a catchment system, you need to think about what size of tank I'm going to sink into the ground. All right? And generally speaking, about a 3,000 to 4,000 gallons tank will carry all the water you need for your household and whatever use of watering your flowers and other things around your place.
Or if you have 2 or 3 months of drought.
Well, you just pray that you don't have a drought.
How many gallons did you say?
Usually a 3,000 to 4,000 gallon tank, and they have non-toxic water tanks that can be buried into the ground. They have nice lids on them in case you have to get in and clean them or whatever. And they're buried into the ground. Now, when you're talking about rain catchment, it's a little more tricky as how to get it into the house out of that tank. If you're off grid and you're dependent on getting that water out of there, if you really want to get old fashioned, you can put a pitcher pump on the counter in your house, and you can run a line from that counter, which would be right near your sink or right by your sink. You've seen them or heard of them. And it'll actually go all the way down into that tank and pump water up, and you'll have water right there on your right there at your sink. Now that's real primitive.
When I was living up in Kentucky, me and my wife was off grid, a very, very small situation compared to what Brother Ron is doing. We put a holding tank upstairs, about 35 gallons, and hand pumped it into that tank, and then we had gravity flow down to the shower and into the sink in the kitchen and sink in the bathroom. So we had gravity flow from that tank down, and it worked real well.
Yeah. Now, with that pitcher pump system, you can use it. It can be a backup, but you can also easily set up in that tank an electric pump run by just a single solar panel. And that single solar panel will run your water into a regular pressure tank that you would use out of a well. And it'll be set up on pressure, and every time that pressure drops to a certain level, it automatically kicks that pump on in the tank, and up comes the pressure again, and you have all the pressure you want in your house. It's a very simple system. It's very efficient, but it's totally off-grid with your solar system. And those little electric motors are very inexpensive, and they last a long time. That's what's really nice about them, because there's not a lot of wear and tear on them.
How long you could keep that water there, it won't go bad?
I don't know, because we never really got weirded about it. We had a 3,000 gallon cistern in our basement in one of our farmsteads, and we collected the water on it before I got my spring developed. That's what we survived off of, is that 3,000 gallon cistern. And we had a pitcher pump, and that's all we had, and it was on a countertop. And we were living real old fashioned. And we just came from the city life. I was a doctor, and we moved from that into the country. And my wife was going like, Ron, I said, really, we got to have something better than this. But it worked, until we could get the other things developed, which I did. I got it developed to where we had a 1,000 gallon holding tank from a gravity flow spring that ran back from that spring into what's called a hydraulic ram pump. And that hydraulic ram pump run the water completely controlled by water, no power of electricity. And it ran it from there all the way up to my 1,000 gallon holding tank, and from there back to the house, completely pressurized. Completely off grid. And you just hope and pray nothing broke down. But it worked very efficient. Now I'm going to tell you, we're living in a time, when we started this out, it was very primitive. There was not too many but hippies doing this. And hippies were willing to really live very primitive for a long time. And I came out of the hippie movement and became a believer in Christ, and I just stayed being a hippie. I wanted to live still that lifestyle on the land, growing food and all those good things.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then I started reading in these little red books that talked about getting into the country, and it made me even weirder. And so it's just been so much a part of our life that we don't know any other way. We don't want to know any other way, to be honest with you. And so when we talk about water, my brain goes into weird places. Or when I talk about any of this stuff, my brain goes into weird places. How do I concentrate all this lifetime into some 3 discussions, So when we talk about water, it's important that you have water. And we're very fortunate back here that we get a lot of rain, and we get the early and latter rains. Amen? Y'all know what the early rains are? I'm going to get off of the Bible here because I get crazy. But in the latter rains, back here in the south, we strongly have the tendency of still having the early and latter rains. We still are not dependent on irrigation for your gardens a lot of times. You have early rain and you have latter rain to help bring the harvest. But if you don't, you've got to make sure that you have adequate amount of water somewhere to irrigate your products. What does that mean? If you're going to grow food, what does that mean?
We need water.
You need water. And if you get into a drought, I had people coming to me and say, Ron, don't you think it's a lack of faith to do that? I said, no, I think it's presumption not to do it. I said, I have a little bit of insurance that y'all don't have. And I said, when the rain cuts off, your plants are going to be dead and mine's going to be thriving. They didn't like that answer. But I can't help it. So when we talk about water, I think about a lot of areas, not just your home and getting water into your home and how to use that water in your home efficiently that works well for you. And we talked the previous discussion about the wood stove having a heating coil in it to heat your water so that you can have good, nice, warm showers and baths. Remember? But you got to have water to do that. The plants need the same thing. So what do you need when you're talking about growing food? You need a source of water. And you need a good amount of water. Right? Now, we're very fortunate. Years ago, we don't have what we have today. A pond is what you want. You want an irrigation pond. If you don't have a creek and you don't have a river or a stream or adequate amount flow of water, you need a pond. And that pond will catch rain from all around it. All right? And it'll fill up. And there is now what we know as solar electric water pumps that will run efficient irrigation systems. Totally dependent on sunshine. And guess what when you need the irrigation? When there's lots of sunshine. Yeah. And it can be totally independent of the grid. But if you're not going to be totally independent of the grid, you have all kinds of gasoline pumps as well that can be set in that pond as well. So a lot of water is very important. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's up there on the screen. I always look with land, especially if I'm thinking about staying there. Not all the land I've bought has always had springs on it or streams on it. Sometimes they have both. Sometimes they have one or the other. And hopefully they have both, but not always. The land we have now doesn't have a stream on it, but it has a nice big pond on it. We had it dug and put in working order. But we have these springs. And springs generally run through a filtering system in and of itself. And generally speaking, most springs, if the land you buy or you have, you know what's around you, so at least it's not being too contaminated. The springs are usually pretty clean, at least up where we're at. And you have to learn how to trap them. This is a picture that you see of a spring. Now you can't see it anymore like this because it's completely covered up and you don't even hardly know it's there on the side of the hill where it's at. But it's open, and we took these pictures purposely, I guess for something like this or sharing it with other people. But that's a spring, and it was at the peak of the summer when we had that droughted condition, because I didn't want that spring running like it normally runs, because that thing will run up to 4 to 5 gallons a minute. I mean, it will put out, that's a inch and 3/4 line coming out of there, and that thing, when it's really running at its height, is just 1 inch and 3/4 full of water coming out like this. Literally coming out like that. When the summer came, it always falls down, but it never dies. It continues to go. So it gave me the opportunity to catch it. I had to wait to deal with the spring when the weather was giving me a drier spell. Because you can't trap them when the rain and the water's going, it's just pouring out of there. And on this ledge where it was coming out, it has a rock ledge, and you can kind of see that rock ledge right there. That ledge goes back into the hill there. And so I dug it all out and caught the main area where the spring water was coming out of. And it was coming out of 2 actual areas in that location. I dug it out and saw where it was, and you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot, and they actually have a concrete that's made for catching, doing like springs. It sets up really fast, and it's really sticky stuff. And so I went down and got a number of bags of it, and that blue thing you see right there was a food grade barrel, 55-gallon barrel. And I took and cut that barrel in that's a 16-inch section of a plastic, what we call the dam. And you can do it other ways, but that's just the way I did it. And I cut that, and I laid that in there with that concrete, and what that did is it began to catch the rain, the water coming out, and it was damming it up. And then I put all that paraphernalia in it, all the piping in it, into that plastic, and then backfilled it with white rock or gravel rock. And what that does is it just allows your water to fill up and not be filling up and just floating around and letting bugs and all that stuff kind of get on it. And so we caught that rain, and now we just didn't take pictures of it, frankly, because I didn't want to. I don't know what reason we didn't get to it. We were right in the middle of something else when I was called to come down here. But it's now trapped from that spring down to a 500-gallon tank. All right? And that 500-gallon tank is probably 50, 60 feet away down the hill from that spring right there. And so there's a 500-gallon tank full of water. Now in that tank, I put a submergible pump that runs off of my solar system that then goes back up the mountain, which is an 80-foot rise to where the house is. And in that ditch, we put a 1-inch water line all the way down there, and we dropped also a 220 electric line in that ditch, which is hooked into my solar system that is hooked into the pump down there in the 500-gallon tank. Now the water line goes to that pressure tank at the house, just like any well system would be, and we have water just as efficient as anybody can ever have water out of a well. And that's just, and there's all kinds of different springs. I had to do it this way because this spring was down in a holler, as all of our neighbors would say. It was very difficult for me to figure out how to get that water up the mountain, 75-foot to 80-foot rise to the house, and get it working efficiently for us. Now, the other way you can deal with that is if you have spring water, or even if you have a really good stream, you can still do similar to this. But you may not want to put it in a pressurized tank. You all have seen pressurized tanks, right? It has a set of points on it. It has like we have about I think it's a 30-gallon pressure tank. No, I think it's a 40-gallon pressure tank. And when that water, that pump kicks on down there at that 500-gallon tank, it sends water up that line into the pressure tank, and it builds up this pressure, and then it cuts off. It has a set of pressure points run by that electric power. And that then is turned from that tank into the house, so my whole water house lines are pressurized. So we have good water pressure. And if you don't want to do that, then you have to build a water tower by this system. And you have to have a water tower high enough so that when it falls from that water tower, that you have enough pressure and volume of water to be able to run whatever you're going to be running in your home. You follow? Now that's keeping you off grid. If you want to be on grid, it's a whole other story. Just hook up to the county water. But the other thing is if you have a spring, and we'll talk about wells here in a minute, but if you have a spring that is high enough on a side of the hill, and you can get 10 feet of fall, just 10 feet of fall, from the spring head, there would be a catch box that would be caught, with that water right there would run into a catch box. And out of that catch box would come another line, and it would run down that 10 feet fall into what's called a hydraulic ram pump. All run by water power. And that hydraulic ram pump will push that water 2.5 miles away. And it'll run 150 feet straight up in the air without any electricity but water. So when I look for land, these are some of the things that I look for. Now, if you don't have that, and you have a well, and that's a whole other story. You have to think of that pressure tank system, and then you have to think about a solar system, and they do have very adequate. Some of the pumps that I have right now that I'm using from this spring into that 500-gallon tank is what they call a slow pump. It's not a regular well pump. It's called a slow pump. When it turns on very slow and easy. If it's coming out of your solar system, you don't want a heavy drain on it real fast, because it'll drain the batteries down boom, like that as it's kicking on. These slow pumps work they're submergible. They're right down inside your well or in a tank, and they go down into your well. They look just like a regular submergible pump, if you're familiar with them, but they were developed for off-grid people in wells. They're called slow pumps. I use a 3/4. And depends on how deep your well is too, and how high it's got to push. But you can look at those, they're called slow pumps, and a lot of these solar companies handle them. Backwoods Solar out in Idaho carries it, and I think that's where we found our pump, was Backwoods Solar.
Can you use the same system for creek?
Out of a creek, yes, you can. If you've got a good creek, however you say it, a stream of water.
Yes.
You can trap water out of that stream, and you can channel it into an area to where you're catching the water. It may take you a number of feet of pipe upstream to channel it down into a container and then go from there. And I've known people, they actually create, believe it or not, they have created off-grid stuff that will blow your mind. When we started this, there was none of this stuff. There was very little. But now they've got water pumps that will go in a stream that runs solely from the flow of the water in the stream. You just tie it off to 2 trees, and it sits there right in the stream, picking up this water, and it's turning this little baby, and it's going like this. Boop, 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 up it goes.
How fast does the water have to be running?
Not real fast. It just has to have a good even flow.
Is it legal to do that?
Yes. Especially if it's running right through your land. Well, I should behave myself here. To me, everything's legal. But you have to look at the county, the state, and all those things where you live. You really do.
Because at one point in time, we defined what they call the waters of the state. Have you heard?
Yeah. Now this is really bad out west. In California, Oregon, and Washington, and some of these other dry states, you have no rights to the water. You have no rights. The rights belongs to the state. And they will only allow you a certain amount of water usage if you're farm status.
Wow.
It's a
Yeah,
Some states,
you don't want to live in those kind of states.
aren't there some states that you can't even catch rainwater?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we don't even want to go there. You don't want to live in those states. You're not living in those states. I think this brother back here in Jersey, in some of these New England states, they're so communistic, it's sick. We have no business living in those states because they've got so many restrictions, you can't even live.
So glad we left there. We're from New Jersey, so I'm glad.
Okay, well, sorry. We won't hold that against you. We're just glad you came. I'm from California, so have mercy on me.
It's a messed up state too.
I have on my property, there's a stream, but it comes out of the ground. It comes out of the ground here, and then it goes like maybe 10 feet, goes back in, and then it comes out again.
Huh.
What is that?
It's water.
I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, it's water is what it is. It's probably a spring system from somewhere that's coming up out of the ground and going back in. I've seen that, but generally it's a spring of some kind, or it's another stream from somewhere else that has gone underground. And that can happen. I mean, I've seen that, and it comes out somewhere else. So, but no matter what, if it stays in water year round, honey, you've got something that's worth everything. Because if you got water, you just need to learn how to trap it and how to get it to where you can use it properly.
We have a little creek, or when it's,
There's a drought.
yeah, if you pass 3 weeks or more, it gets dry. So when it's heavy rain,
Yeah.
I could count about 20 holes, about that big.
Yep.
Then you could see the water coming out of there, but nice and clear, no orange or dirty water, nice and clear.
Yeah.
And it's a shame they get dry.
Well, it gets dry because you moved in the wrong county.
Yeah, yes.
When you have a situation like that, it's generally caused because of rain runoff. And those are not dependable creeks. They just are not. You can't not depend on them. Because that's what happens, is it's dependent upon your rainfall. And the rainfall, it can be very inconsistent. Unfortunately, or fortunately, you're in the country, just make the best of what you got. That's all I can say. Because you're already there, you're already established, and you're already heading in the right direction. So praise the Lord for that. But for anybody else looking for land, do not ask questions. When you ask about land, it's not about just being cheap. It's about going to your neighbors, going to the old timers, and say, what's the water table like around here? That's what we did. We asked. I wanted to know. I went to the original owners of this land and talked to them. And says, do these springs ever dry up? He says, he's 62 years old, and he says, I grew up and I was born and raised on this farm. My grandfather owned this farm, my daddy owned this farm, and now I own this farm, and my sister and I are selling this 200 acres of our original farm. So I said, wow. So I went to him and asked him, do these springs ever? He said, man, he said, they've never dried up. He said, they might get down to a smaller trickle, but they're always there and have always been a good source of water. That's worth everything to a homestead. To make sure that you have adequate, sufficient water, and because you depended on it. You just are. So one way or the other, whether you have wells, springs, stream, pond, whatever it is, water is incredibly necessary for livestock, for yourselves, for gardens, for your flowers, for your orchards, your berries, and all those things. So when you do these things, just keep those things in mind. And for those that have been already blessed to move out, and you do the best with what you got, that is a lot better than being in a city. Yeah, I mean, anytime. Okay. I don't know what else we need to talk about when it comes down to rain catchment.
What type of gardening system did you recommend here?
Gardening?
No, guttering.
Oh, guttering. Well, you'll have to look online. There's all kinds of them. But when it comes down to guttering, I don't know how to turn this thing backwards. How do you go back to the other? This one?
Over here.
Oh, here. Okay.
Yeah,
There.
there.
Now you can see that guttering pretty well. That guttering is a 6-inch gutter. That's what they call the industrial gutter size. It may look a little bit bulky on your house, but I don't care. It still looks nice, but it catches a good amount of rain. And the down system, as you can see, is a downspout. That system is on the back porch as well as on the front porch, so we have the double catch. We catch the rain off the back system and off the front system. Now, I haven't got around yet as getting our system all trapped because I've been working on that spring. And once I get done with the spring, I may not even think about catching rain from the roof. But if I do, then my next step would be is to bury a tank into the ground and then catch all that rainwater and tie it in like I've been talking. But those downspouts would actually, if I could had a board to point at it, as it comes down and you see it right there about the crux of the porch, the deck of the porch, I would elbow it there and take that elbow back across the house and catch this one, come across the house and meet right here at a T and put that tank right there.
So where?
And you would catch right there in that little lawn. See the flowers?
Yeah.
And then the flowers along the house. There's that grass. Oh, sorry. That grass right there.
Okay.
In the yard there,
Right there in that yard would be a buried tank.
side yard.
Yes. And all the rainwater, and the only thing I would do differently is I would take that gutter system, because right now I got it to where the rain will actually go off both sides. But all I have to do is unscrew it and lift that into the gutter system up a little bit so all the water comes this way. Very easy to do. It's not difficult. Same thing on the back system. And one of the things that you will see in this house, what we talked about in the previous lesson, is that you want your system, you want your house to where it stays dry. Get your water running away from your house. Your down system, your gutter system, and your underground system takes your water away from your house. You don't want it sitting around your house. Creates all kinds of problems. Okay, anything else about water that we need to talk? We talked about filters, we talked about ponds, we talked about rain catchment, we talked about solar, we talked about pumps.
I'd like to know how you use your water system for your garden and watering your garden.
Well,
Irrigation system, so.
yes,
Like that.
that's why I have a pond, yeah, and we'll get into that next. So, we're going to look at that. Again, like I said, on this farm, it's me. And I'm doing all the work, so I'm still working on this farm to get it to where I want it to be. All right, so what I'm in the process of doing is getting us completely set up. It's been step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Like I said, you gotta have to put a plan in action. And so that's where we're at. My next steps are to finish my spring system and get it completely trapped and harnessed, and getting that, then the water system to me is number 1. And then after that will come the complete the irrigation system to irrigating our produce production system. Most of my larger produce production system is dependent on rain, and I don't even care about irrigation for it. My biggest irrigation that I use is for the smaller things, and we'll talk about that, because I'm going to automatically launch right into it if I'm not careful. All right.
Before you go on, how do you purify water?
In my house,
Well, it's drinking water.
a Berkey water filter. Yeah. Berkey, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. Berkey.
So, my question is, if you have a spring on your property, or if you have a stream that flows through your property, which comes actually, onto your property and then exits your property, would not town or a city regulate that? I mean, if you block that path and harness it, like you're saying, there's nothing gonna happen downstream. There's gonna be water.
Well, you don't want to block somebody's stream. I just said catch it.
Okay, wrong choice of words. Catch it, you have an overflow then.
Well, you're not damming up the stream in any way, shape, or form. You know, unless it's your stream, you don't want to dam that stream up, because they will frown on that big time. But you can catch it. You can put a pipe system in that stream. If you've got enough space on your property, you can actually catch into that stream a 6-inch pipeline, drop down, drop down, drop down, and drop down, until it'll run a turbine to create electricity. Or it can run a what we call a hydraulic pump system. I mean, it'll do wondrous stuff, but you have to go up the stream. I've got a friend in California, family we've known for a long, long time, and that's what they did. They bought water rights into this irrigation stream out of the mountains, and he ran almost a mile up the stream with a tubing system. And brother, his whole house is run off this stream, just by catching it from a larger down into a smaller system. In fact, you go out there to irrigate the garden, you turn the hose on, it really knocks the hose off the deal. The pressure's so huge. If you have enough adequate, length in that stream, and there's nothing they can do about that because it's on you. But if you dam that stream up, they're going to really frown on you. But you're not damming it. You're only trapping what you're going to be using.
So the rest of it goes on down.
Oh, it goes right on down. They may never even know you've done it. Because what you're catching is, you may be catching 2, 3, 4 gallons a minute. And you don't need any more than that. You know what I mean? And you can take that and let that run 24 hours a day, and it could be filling up a pond or an irrigation tank or a household water storage tank right out of that little creek, because it's going to be running 24/7. Yeah, and if you have that water and it's there, oh, you have a gold mine. And if it runs year round, oh my. I mean, that's the thing. You've got to have water that runs consistently. Yeah. All right. A lot about water. And I think you kind of get the idea without too much overwhelming. If you have any other questions, we'll try to address it. Otherwise, we'll give you a little break and then we'll step into the next section because it's going to be a bit longer.
I built a house next door to my parents, and when you said something about the dump being located in within a certain radius around your property, ours is about 2 miles away from our house, west of our house. So we used to have a pond that was behind my property, my parents' property, and our neighboring property. But the stream that fed the pond was located on the east side, so on the opposite direction from where the dump is located. So I guess I'm wondering, I mean, if the stream's flowing from the opposite direction of the dump.
It's okay.
Would be okay.
Yeah.
But an aquifer well, if we decided to do that, would the dump affect an aquifer well? Would it be so deep? Or would it be more of just the more super?
Is it a using dump now?
Yes,
It is.
it's like a residential,
Oh,
it's not like it's a residential dump.
yeah.
If they bury the garbage there, they might just cart it off. They usually cart it off.
Yeah, do you know what they're doing with it? Is it like you say, are they burying it? Or is it taken to another location, I wonder?
My husband usually goes there. I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've been over here.
There's something called leachate. Did you check for nitrate? Some of you have to check for nitrate. All of those, the leachate, all of those.
You know, I would talk to people around your territory and ask them what their wells are like. You know, and even take the water to the water department and have them give an analysis on it. Because you really don't know which way your water's coming from.
That's right. You know.
I mean, you really don't. So I would go to a neighbor if they have a well and ask them, have you ever had your well tested? And you can take their water, because if their water is good, then most likely your water would be good, because the aquifer, the water channel, may be coming from a totally different direction. And that's, you know, that would solve that in your mind. Because if it's not, and their water has a problem, then you know what you're up against. And you won't have to go to the expense of having a well put in. You know? So, but yeah, I would just go to your neighbors and see what their water's like. A lot of neighbors don't even use wells anymore because the counties come in and they put in, water, and everybody's become very dependent on their county water. Right now, on this place we're at, that's what we have. We have what they call country county water. It was there on the farm, and so we hooked into it. It allowed me some time to get after my springs and trapping and doing all that, because that's a job. And most people don't know how big of a job it is until they've done it. And I've done it too many times, and I'm really tired of doing it. But I was thankful that the county water was there, but I have a filter that filters out any of the chlorine and fluorine and all that stuff. But it gave me some time to be able to get what I needed to get done. And honestly, I think outside the box, and I'm always shooting for the ultimate, but I'm not so dumb that I can't have mercy on other people and myself too. You know what I mean? Because we're up against the big wall, and we can only do the best we can do with what we have. And leave the rest in the hands of the Lord and be at peace. But don't sit down idle and not do anything. Okay.
And you prefer the water storage to be underground instead of?
Well, if I'm doing water catchment, You know, unless you have a situation where you can have a water tower and it's above ground, that's another story. But if you're doing water catchment off of a roof, I want underground because the ground stays stable in its temperature. All right, it will stay usually in the 50s somewhere. And if you get it down and it's buried, the sun can't get to it and algae won't start growing.
It's not supposed to in the black ones.
That's right. But the heat increases the bacteria growth in these tanks. So if you can get it underground to where the sun can't get to it, and even better than that, then build some kind of a roof system over it to where it's shaded completely, from the sunshine, and it's going to protect that water to be better longer. Yeah.